morning started like any other Saturday for little May. She woke up at 6, brushed her teeth, and went straight to the old piano in their living room. Her mom was still making breakfast when the sound of scales filled their small apartment. This had been their routine for 5 years now, ever since May was 3 years old and couldn't even reach the pedals properly. Today was different, though. Today was the day of the big audition. The Berkshire International Piano Competition didn't usually let kids under 12 participate, but May's piano teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had fought hard to get her a spot. She'd sent recordings, written letters, and made countless phone calls. Finally, they'd agreed to let May audition, though the person on the phone had made it clear they were doing this as a special favor and nothing more. May's father drove them to the competition hall 3 hours early. He was nervous, constantly adjusting the rearview mirror and asking if May needed anything. Her mother sat in the back with her, holding her hand and reminding her to breathe deeply if she got scared. But May wasn't scared. She never really got scared when it came to piano. Playing music was the one thing that made complete sense to her. More sense than math homework or playground games or anything else in her 8-year-old world. The competition hall was enormous, with tall ceilings and red velvet seats that seemed to go on forever. When they walked in, May's eyes went wide. She'd played in recitals before, but nothing like this. There were at least 300 seats, and a beautiful black grand piano sat on the stage under bright lights. Other families were already there, and May noticed that most of the other kids looked much older than her. Some were teenagers with serious faces, wearing fancy concert clothes. May looked down at her simple blue dress and suddenly felt very small. Mrs. Rodriguez met them at the entrance, her face bright with encouragement. She knelt down to May's level and smiled. "Remember what we practiced, okay? You know this piece inside and out. You've played it 100 times. Just do what you always do and everything will be fine." May nodded, clutching her folder with the sheet music inside. She'd been working on this piece for 6 months every single day, and she knew every note by heart. But Mrs. Rodriguez had taught her to always bring the music anyway, just in case. The waiting area was crowded and loud. Parents whispered nervously to their children. Some kids were doing breathing exercises. Others had their eyes closed, probably running through their pieces mentally. One boy, who looked about 14, kept cracking his knuckles over and over until his mother told him to stop. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. May sat quietly, watching everyone. She didn't feel the need to practice or prepare. She just watched and listened. That was something she'd always done ever since she was tiny. Her parents used to joke that she observed the world like a little scientist, taking everything in with those thoughtful eyes. The auditions began at 9 in the morning. A stern-looking woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun came out and explained the rules. Each performer would have exactly 10 minutes. They would play their prepared piece for a panel of 5 judges, all of them famous musicians or teachers. The judges would take notes but wouldn't provide feedback during the audition. Results would be posted in 2 weeks. One by one, numbers were called. May was number 47. She watched as contestant after contestant walked through those double doors leading to the auditorium. Some came back smiling. Others looked like they wanted to cry. One girl came out shaking so badly her mother had to wrap her in a hug for several minutes. Hours passed. The judges had started at 9, and by 2 in the afternoon they'd only gotten through 35 contestants. May's father brought her a sandwich, but she could only eat half. Not because she was nervous, but because sitting still for so long was making her restless. She wanted to play. Her fingers kept moving on her lap, practicing the piece silently. Behind those closed doors, the 5 judges were getting tired. Dr. Helena Volkov, a famous concert pianist who'd played in halls across Europe, rubbed her temples. She'd been judging competitions for 30 years, and while she loved discovering new talent, days like this were exhausting. Next to her sat Professor Chen, a composition teacher from Beijing. Then there was Dmitry Kozlov, a former child prodigy himself who now taught at a prestigious music academy. The other 2 judges, both accomplished musicians, were also showing signs of fatigue. "How many more?" Professor Chen asked, not bothering to hide his exhaustion. 12, answered the competition coordinator, checking her clipboard. Dr. Volkov sighed. They'd heard some good performances today, certainly. A few had been quite impressive, but nothing exceptional. Nothing that made her sit up and forget about the ache in her back or the hunger in her stomach. She'd been hoping to discover someone special, someone who reminded her why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. So far, that hadn't happened. The next few contestants came and went. Number 36 played Chopin, but missed several notes in the middle section. Number 37 had good technique but no emotion. Number 38 forgot a part and had to start over, leaving the stage in tears. By the time they reached number 45, the judges were barely looking up from their score sheets. They'd gone into autopilot mode, marking down technical scores and brief notes almost mechanically. Finally, the coordinator called out, "Number 47, Mei Chen." In the waiting room, Mei stood up. Her mother squeezed her hand one more time. Her father kissed the top of her head. Mrs. Rodriguez walked with her to the double doors and gave her one last smile. "You've got this, sweetheart. Just play like you always do." Mei walked through those doors into the huge auditorium. The stage suddenly looked very far away, and the piano looked even bigger than it had that morning. Her footsteps echoed as she walked down the aisle. The 5 judges sat behind a long table in the middle of the auditorium, their faces tired and somewhat blank. One of them was writing something and didn't even look up when she entered. She climbed the steps to the stage, her small legs taking them one at a time. The piano bench was too low and she had to wait while someone adjusted it for her height. Her feet barely touched the floor even after the adjustment. She placed her folder with the sheet music on the stand, her hands trembling slightly. Not from fear but from excitement. She was finally going to play. Dr. Volkov glanced up briefly, saw the small child at the piano, and glanced back down at her score sheet. Another young one, she thought. She'd seen dozens today. She picked up her pen, ready to mark another score and move on to the next contestant. None of the judges knew that in the next few moments, everything they thought they knew about young musicians was about to change completely. Mei took a breath and reached for her music. And then it happened. Mei's small hands rested on the folder containing her sheet music. She was about to open it when suddenly, a strong gust of cold air blasted from the air conditioning vent directly above the stage. The folder flew open, and before Mei could grab anything, the pages scattered everywhere. They floated through the air like white butterflies, landing all across the stage. Some slid under the piano. Others drifted toward the edge of the stage. One page actually made it all the way to the front row of seats. The few people in the auditorium gasped. Mei stood there, frozen for a moment, watching her music spread across the floor. Her heart jumped into her throat. This wasn't supposed to happen. Mrs. Rodriguez had always told her to keep the music secure, to use clips if needed. But Mei had never needed clips before. Nothing like this had ever gone wrong. Dr. Volkov looked up from her score sheet, finally paying full attention. She saw the small girl standing at the piano. Pages of music scattered everywhere, and felt a wave of sympathy mixed with resignation. The poor child. This was probably her first big competition, and now this. She reached for her pen, ready to mark the situation down. They could offer her a chance to collect the music and start over. But Volkov had seen this kind of thing shake young performers so badly that they couldn't recover. The day was almost over anyway. They were all exhausted. Professor Chen leaned over to Volkov and whispered, "Should we give her a moment to collect the pages?" Volkov was about to nod when something stopped her. The girl wasn't moving. She wasn't scrambling to pick up the scattered sheets. She wasn't crying or looking panicked. She was just standing there completely still with her eyes closed. Mei had closed her eyes the instant the music flew away. In that moment, something clicked in her mind like a switch being flipped. She could see the music. Not with her eyes, because those were shut tight. But in her head, every single page appeared as clear as day. She'd played this piece so many times that it wasn't just memorized anymore. It lived inside her. Every note, every pause, every place where her left hand needed to cross over her right. The piece she'd chosen was La Campanella by Franz Liszt. Mrs. Rodriguez had initially said it was too difficult, that maybe Mei should choose something easier for her first real competition. But Mei had insisted. She'd heard a recording of it 2 years ago, and from that moment she'd been obsessed. The way the notes jumped and danced, the way the melody seemed to tell a story of bells ringing in a distant tower. She'd begged to learn it, and Mrs. Rodriguez had finally agreed on one condition. Mei had to practice it every single day until she could play it perfectly. And she had. For 6 months, Mei had practiced La Campanella for hours each day, not because anyone forced her to, but because she loved it. Her parents sometimes worried she was practicing too much. But whenever they suggested taking a break, she'd look at them with those serious eyes and say, "Just one more time." That one more time usually turned into 10 more times. Now, standing on that stage with her music scattered everywhere, May let the piece unfold in her mind. She could see the first page, the opening notes that started soft and mysterious. She could see where the tempo picked up, where her fingers would need to move faster than most people thought possible. She could see the difficult sections that had taken her weeks to master, the places where one wrong move would make everything fall apart. 3 seconds. That's how long she stood there with her eyes closed. 3 seconds that felt like an eternity to the judges watching her. 3 seconds during which Dmitry Kozlov, the former child prodigy on the panel, sat forward in his seat. He recognized something in her stillness. It was the same thing he used to do as a child. That moment of complete focus before beginning a difficult piece. When May opened her eyes, they weren't looking at where the music had fallen. They were looking at the keys in front of her. She adjusted herself slightly on the bench, positioned her hands over the keyboard, and began to play. The first notes rang out pure and clear. Dr. Volkov's pen, which had been moving toward the score sheet, stopped in midair. That wasn't the sound of a nervous child. That was the sound of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. May's fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that seemed impossible for someone so small. La Campanella is not an easy piece. Even professional pianists struggle with its rapid jumps and complex fingering. It demands precision, speed, and a delicate touch all at the same time. One missed note, one moment of hesitation, and the whole thing falls apart like a house of cards. But May didn't miss a single note. Her small hands stretched across octaves that should have been too wide for her. Her fingers flew through passages that most teenagers would stumble over. The difficult double note sections, where both hands had to play pairs of notes in perfect synchronization, flowed from her fingers like water running downhill. It wasn't just technically correct. It was beautiful. Professor Chen's mouth fell open slightly. He'd been teaching piano for 40 years and he'd never seen a child this young play Liszt. He glanced at the other judges and saw the same shock reflected on their faces. Even Dr. Volkov, who prided herself on maintaining professional composure, had completely forgotten about her score sheet. The piece built in intensity. May's whole body moved with the music now, swaying gently with the rhythm. Her face showed complete concentration, but there was also something else there. Joy. Pure, simple joy. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She wasn't playing because she had to. She was playing because this music lived inside her and needed to come out. In the waiting room outside, people had stopped talking. The sound was traveling through the walls, and even though it was muffled, everyone could tell something special was happening. Mrs. Rodriguez stood by the door, her hand over her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes. She'd known May was talented, but this was beyond anything she'd imagined. May's parents sat holding hands, listening to their daughter play. Her mother was crying silently. Her father kept shaking his head in disbelief as if he couldn't quite accept what he was hearing. Back in the auditorium, the piece was reaching its climax. This was the hardest part, the section that required the most speed and precision. May's fingers became almost a blur. The notes cascaded from the piano like falling rain, each one crystal clear despite the incredible speed. Her left hand provided the deep, resonant foundation, while her right hand danced through the melody high above. Dmitry Kozlov realized he was holding his breath. He'd been a child prodigy himself, had performed in major concert halls before he was 12. But even he had never played La Campanella at age 8. He'd attempted it at 11 and had struggled for months before getting it right. This child was playing it from memory without hesitation, after her sheet music had scattered everywhere. It was beyond remarkable. It was almost impossible. The other contestants who had finished their auditions had gathered near the auditorium doors, drawn by the sound. They stood there listening, some with admiration on their faces, others with the dawning realization that they were hearing something they might never be able to achieve themselves. A few looked discouraged, but most just seemed amazed. May played the final section, the part where the bells seemed to ring one last time before fading away. Her hands slowed, the notes becoming softer, gentler, like a lullaby. And then, with one final, delicate touch, she played the last note. Her hands lifted from the keys and came to rest in her lap. The note hung in the air, slowly fading into silence. And in that silence, something extraordinary happened. The silence that followed May's performance was unlike anything anyone in that auditorium had experienced before. It wasn't the awkward silence that sometimes follows a mediocre performance, where people don't know whether to clap or not. This was different. This was the kind of silence that happens when people are so moved, so completely stunned, that their brains need a moment to catch up with what they just witnessed. May sat at the piano, her small hands still resting in her lap. She looked calm, almost peaceful, as if she'd just finished having a conversation with an old friend rather than performing one of the most technically demanding pieces in classical piano repertoire. She didn't know yet what her performance had done to everyone listening. She just knew she'd played it the way it was supposed to be played, the way she heard it in her head every night before falling asleep. Then Dr. Volkov stood up, just stood straight up from her chair, the movement so sudden that her score sheet slid off the table and fluttered to the floor. She didn't even notice. Her hands came together and she began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster, louder. The sound echoed through the huge auditorium. Professor Chen was next. Then Dmitry Kozlov, whose own eyes were glistening with tears he didn't bother to hide. The other two judges followed, all 5 of them standing now applauding this 8-year-old child who had just played like someone 3 times her age, with 10 times her experience. This never happened. Judges didn't applaud during auditions. It was an unwritten rule, something so firmly established that breaking it was almost unthinkable. They were supposed to remain neutral, professional, objective, but rules and protocols seemed meaningless now. What they'd just heard demanded recognition, demanded response. The sound of their applause seemed to break the spell on everyone else. The handful of people scattered throughout the auditorium jumped to their feet. Outside in the waiting area, people began clapping, even though they'd only heard the muffled sound through the walls. The door burst open and Mrs. Rodriguez ran in, completely forgetting about proper etiquette, tears streaming down her face. Other parents and contestants followed, filling the back of the auditorium, everyone on their feet, everyone clapping. May finally understood what was happening. She stood up from the piano bench and did what Mrs. Rodriguez had taught her to do after performing. She bowed. It was a small, slightly awkward bow, the kind an 8-year-old makes when she's not quite sure how deep to go or how long to hold it. But somehow that made it even more endearing. Here was this child who could play like an angel, but still bowed like a little girl at her first recital. The applause went on for what felt like forever. Dr. Volkov was clapping so hard her hands hurt. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this way, this overwhelming sense of having witnessed something truly special. In her 30 years of judging competitions, she'd seen talented children before. She'd seen teenagers who played with technical perfection, but this was different. This child hadn't just played the notes correctly. She'd understood the music, felt it, lived it in a way that couldn't be taught. When the applause finally died down, May walked carefully to the edge of the stage to collect her scattered sheet music. But the competition coordinator, a woman who'd been running these events for 15 years and had never broken protocol before, quickly walked onto the stage and told her not to worry about it, that they would take care of it. She guided May off the stage, her hand gentle on the child's shoulder. As May walked back up the aisle toward the exit, people reached out to touch her arm, to pat her shoulder. Some were crying. A teenage boy who'd performed earlier that day looked at her with a mixture of awe and something close to despair. Realizing that his own technically sound but emotionally flat performance couldn't compare to what he'd just heard, Mrs. Rodriguez met May halfway and pulled her into a tight hug. She was crying so hard she couldn't speak, just holding this little girl who'd been coming to her house for piano lessons twice a week for 5 years. She'd always known May was special, but this was beyond special. This was extraordinary. May's parents were right behind Mrs. Rodriguez. Her mother swept her up into her arms, even though May was really getting too big to be carried. "I believe you," Dr. Volkov said. "And that's actually good news, because what I'm about to tell you is going to come with a lot of opportunities, and you're going to need to be very selective about which ones you accept." She pulled out her phone and showed them something. It was a video, already posted online by someone who'd been in the auditorium. In just 20 minutes, it had already gotten thousands of views. "This performance is going to go viral. By tomorrow morning, you're probably going to have news outlets wanting to interview her. Music schools will be calling with scholarship offers. Concert venues will want her to perform. It's going to be overwhelming. May's mother put her hand over her mouth. Oh no, we're just a normal family. We live in a small apartment. We don't know anything about this world. That's why we're having this conversation now, Professor Chen said. Before all of that starts, we want to help you navigate what comes next, but only if you want our help, and only with your daughter's best interests in mind. Dr. Volkov looked at each of them in turn. Here's what I propose. First, May obviously advances to the finals of this competition. In fact, I'd be shocked if she doesn't win. But after that, I think we need to be very strategic. Yes to the opportunities that will help her grow as a musician. No to anything that treats her like a circus act or a commodity. I have connections at several top music schools, she continued. Schools that have experience working with gifted young students. Places that can provide her with world-class training, while still letting her be a child. But I think she should stay in regular school too. She needs friends her own age, needs normal experiences. Music should enhance her childhood, not replace it. Mrs. Rodriguez was nodding vigorously. I agree completely. I can continue working with her, but she's already surpassed my skill level in many ways. She needs teachers who can challenge her at the level she's reached. What about performances? May's father asked. Should she be doing concerts? Dmitri answered this time. Some, yes, but carefully selected. Maybe 2 or 3 per year to start. Enough to give her experience performing for audiences, but not so many that it becomes her whole life. And they should be performances she wants to do, pieces she's excited about. Never forced, never just for money or publicity. They talked for another hour, discussing possibilities, setting boundaries, making plans. Dr. Volkov gave them her personal phone number and email, something she rarely did. She also connected them with a lawyer who specialized in child performers' rights, to make sure May would be protected from anyone who might try to exploit her talent. Finally, someone brought May back into the room. She'd finished her cookies and seemed perfectly content, completely unaware of the serious discussion that had been happening about her future. She climbed into her mother's lap even though she was really too big for it, and her father ruffled her hair. Did I do okay? May asked, looking up at her parents with those serious eyes. Her mother hugged her tight. You did more than okay, sweetheart. You were amazing. Can we go home now? I want to practice something new I've been thinking about. The adults all laughed, the tension finally breaking. Here was this child who just delivered a performance that had stunned professional musicians, and all she wanted to do was go home and practice more. Not because anyone was making her, but because she genuinely loved it. As they left the competition hall, May holding both her parents' hands, Dr. Volkov watched them go. She'd made a promise to herself that day. She would do everything in her power to protect this extraordinary gift, while protecting the child who possessed it. The music world had failed too many young prodigies. She wouldn't let that happen to May. 2 weeks later, the competition results were announced. May won by unanimous decision. It wasn't even close. The judges had rarely agreed on anything so completely in the history of the Berkshire International Piano Competition. When May's name was called as the winner, the audience erupted in applause that lasted nearly 5 minutes. She walked onto the stage to accept her trophy, a crystal piano that was almost as big as she was, and gave that same slightly awkward bow that somehow made everyone love her even more. But by then, everything had already changed. The video of her performance had spread across the internet like wildfire. Within 3 days, it had millions of views. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines read things like 8-year-old plays, impossible piano piece from memory, and child prodigy stuns classical music world. May's face was suddenly everywhere. The phone calls started almost immediately. A morning talk show wanted her to perform live. A prestigious concert hall in New York offered her a solo performance slot. 3 different music schools called with full scholarship offers. A record label wanted to produce an album. A talent agency sent someone to their apartment building, waiting outside to speak with them. It was exactly what Dr. Volkov had warned them about, and it was completely overwhelming. May's parents felt like they were drowning. They were ordinary people who'd never dealt with anything like this. Her father took time off work to handle all the calls and emails. Her mother stopped sleeping well, worried about making the wrong decisions for their daughter. And through it all, May just wanted to practice piano, confused about why everyone was making such a big fuss. Dr. Volkov became their lifeline. She called them every few days, helping them sort through the opportunities, teaching them which offers to seriously consider and which to politely decline. She connected them with other parents of gifted young musicians, people who'd walked this path before and could offer advice and support. Remember, Dr. Volkov told them during one particularly stressful phone call, "You don't owe anyone anything. May's talent is a gift, but that doesn't mean the world has the right to consume her childhood. Say no to anything that doesn't feel right. Say no to anything that puts pressure on her, and definitely say no to anything that's more about spectacle than music." They turned down the morning talk show. They declined the reality show that wanted to follow May's daily life. They said no to the commercial that wanted her to play piano in the background while selling luxury cars. Each rejection was difficult because the money being offered was life-changing, but they kept coming back to the same question: would this be good for May? What they did accept was a spot at the Thornton Music Academy, a specialized program for gifted young musicians that met on Saturday mornings. The program was run by Dr. Volkov herself, and it was specifically designed for children like May. She would continue going to her regular school during the week, having normal friendships and normal childhood experiences. But on Saturdays, she'd work with world-class instructors who could push her abilities further than Mrs. Rodriguez could alone. Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't offended. In fact, she was relieved. She'd always known that May would eventually outgrow what she could teach, and she was grateful it was happening in such a thoughtful way. She still saw May once a week for lessons, but now those lessons were more about mentorship and friendship than technical instruction. They also agreed to 2 performances that first year. One was a small recital at the Music Academy, performing for an audience of about 100 people, mostly other students and their families. The other was a charity concert, benefiting a program that provided free music lessons to underprivileged children. Both performances felt meaningful rather than exploitative, but saying no had consequences. Some people in the classical music world were angry. They said May's parents were wasting her talent, that she should be performing as much as possible while she was still a novelty. Some critics wrote articles questioning whether May was really as talented as people claimed, or if her viral performance had been a lucky moment that she could never replicate. The criticism hurt, especially for May's parents who were trying so hard to do the right thing. But Dr. Volkov reminded them that the same critics had said similar things about every young musician who didn't follow the traditional path of constant performances and maximum exposure. "Let them talk," she said firmly. "May's talent will speak for itself when the time is right. For now, the most important thing is protecting her love of music." And May did still love music. She practiced every day, but now it was more structured and purposeful. Her new instructors at the academy introduced her to pieces she'd never encountered, composers she'd never explored. She learned music theory at an advanced level, understanding not just how to play but why the music worked the way it did. She started trying to compose her own pieces, sitting at the piano for hours working out melodies that existed only in her imagination. School remained a mixed experience. Some kids were impressed by her talent and wanted to be her friend just because she was famous. Others were jealous or called her a show-off, even though May never talked about her piano playing unless someone asked. She learned quickly who her real friends were, the ones who liked her for who she was, not what she could do. Her best friend, a girl named Wei who lived in the same apartment building, didn't even like classical music. She preferred pop songs and video games, but she liked May because May was kind and funny and didn't act like she was better than everyone else. Sometimes Wei would come over and they'd just play regular kid games, the piano sitting silent in the corner. Those were the moments May's parents treasured most, seeing their daughter laugh and be silly and be 8 years old. The months passed. The internet's attention span being what it was, the viral video eventually faded from the trending pages. New viral videos took its place. People moved on to the next sensation, and that was exactly what May's family had hoped for. They could go to the grocery store without being recognized. May could go to school without journalists showing up. Life returned to something close to normal, but the classical music world hadn't forgotten. Professionals who'd seen that video remembered. Teachers and musicians talked about it in quiet conversations at conferences and competitions. May's name became shorthand for extraordinary young talent, the kind that appears once in a generation. 5 years later, when May was 13, she gave her first major public performance at a renowned concert hall. She played not just La Campanella, but an entire program of advanced pieces including 2 of her own compositions. The hall was packed with music lovers, critics, and professionals who'd been waiting to see if the viral sensation could deliver again. She did. The performance was everything her first audition had been and more. Her technique had matured. Her emotional range had deepened. But she still had that same quality that had made her special at 8 years old. That sense of pure joy in making music. She played not to impress but to share something beautiful with everyone listening. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes. Critics wrote glowing reviews. But this time May's parents were ready for what came next. They'd learned how to navigate the attention, how to protect their daughter while still allowing her talent to flourish. They accepted some opportunities and declined others. They kept May in regular school. They made sure she had time for friends and hobbies and all the normal things teenagers care about. Dr. Volkov, who'd become like a second grandmother to May, watched from the audience that night with tears in her eyes. This was what she'd hoped for 5 years ago, when she'd seen that small girl play at the competition. Not just a talented musician, but a healthy, happy young woman who happened to have an extraordinary gift. After the concert, a reporter asked May what she wanted to do with her life. Where did she see herself in 10 years? May thought for a moment, then smiled. I want to keep playing piano. I want to keep learning. And someday maybe I want to teach like Dr. Volkov and Mrs. Rodriguez taught me. Because music shouldn't just be about being the best or being famous. It should be about sharing something beautiful with other people and helping them find their own voice. The reporter expected her to say she wanted to be the world's greatest pianist or perform at every major concert hall. But May's answer was more profound than that. She understood something that many musicians spend their entire lives learning. That true greatness isn't about individual glory, but about using your gifts to make the world a little more beautiful. That night, as May's family drove home, she sat in the back seat looking out the window at the city lights. She thought about the day her sheet music had scattered across that stage 5 years ago, about those 3 seconds when she'd closed her eyes and seen the music in her mind. That moment had changed everything, but the most important thing hadn't changed at all. She still loved playing piano just as much as she had when she was 3 years old, reaching up to touch those keys for the first time. And that love, more than any talent or technique, was what would carry her forward into whatever her future held.